A powerful businessman leaves the company building, unaware that his life is about to change. A 7-year-old girl warns him his car will explode. She heard everything in Chinese, a language few there understood. In that instant, he just laughed. But 2 minutes later, everything changed.
Chapter 1. The Warning. The cold October wind swept through the streets of Manhattan as Richard Sterling stepped out of the granite tower that housed Sterling Industries headquarters. The 60-story building pierced the sky like a monument to his 30 years of relentless ambition. Today had been particularly exhausting. The board meeting had stretched for hours, debating the merger that would either cement his legacy or destroy everything he had built. Richard adjusted his navy suit jacket and glanced at his watch. His security team surrounded him in their usual formation, a choreographed dance of protection they performed twice daily. The black sedan waited at the curb, engine running, ready to whisk him away to his penthouse on Fifth Avenue, where a quiet evening and expensive scotch awaited. But as his hand reached for the door handle, a small voice cut through the urban symphony of honking taxis and distant sirens. "Mister, please don't get in that car." Richard turned, irritation flickering across his features. A young girl, no more than 7 years old, stood on the sidewalk. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes, though clean, had seen better days. Her eyes held an intensity that seemed far too mature for her age. "Sweetheart, I'm very busy," Richard said, his tone dismissive yet not unkind. He had donated to enough children's charities to know how to speak to kids, even if he never spent actual time with them. "Sir, you can't go," the girl insisted, stepping closer, despite the imposing presence of the security guards. "I heard them talking. They're going to do something bad. Really bad." One of the guards, Marcus, a tall man with an expressionless face, moved to gently redirect the child. "Little lady, you need to step back." But something in the girl's voice made Richard pause. Perhaps it was the tremor beneath her words, or the way her small hands clenched into fists as if gathering courage. In his decades of navigating corporate battlefields, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, something whispered that he should listen. "Wait." Richard held up his hand, stopping Marcus. He crouched down to the girl's eye level, his knees protesting the movement. "What's your name?" "Emma," she replied, her voice steadier now that she had his attention. "Emma Rodriguez." "Okay, Emma, what did you hear?" Emma glanced nervously at the security team circling them. "I was sitting over there," she pointed to a bench near the building entrance, "waiting for my grandma. She works in the cleaning crew, third shift. The men were standing close to me, talking. They didn't think anyone could understand them because they were speaking Russian." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You speak Russian?" "My grandmother taught me. She came from Moscow when she was young. She always says knowing languages opens doors." Emma's words tumbled out faster now. The tall one with the scar and the younger one with the red tie they were talking about tonight. About documents. About switching papers in your briefcase before you sign them. They said something about accounts, numbers that don't match, and that by tomorrow morning everything would be transferred. The businessman's blood ran cold. Tomorrow morning, he was scheduled to sign the final merger documents in his study at home. Documents that would authorize the transfer of substantial assets. Documents he had reviewed personally, but that would spend tonight in his briefcase, in his car during the drive home. "Marcus," Richard said slowly, not taking his eyes off Emma, "where's my briefcase?" "Already secured in the trunk, sir." As per protocol, Richard stood up, his mind racing. The merger with Blackwood Corporation had been contentious from the start. Too many people stood to gain or lose fortunes, depending on how the papers were structured. He thought of his assistant, Thomas, the only person he truly trusted, who had expressed concerns about some of the security team's recent behavior. "Emma," Richard said, his voice gentle but urgent, "this is very important. Can you describe the men you heard?" "Exactly." As Emma began describing the guards in detail, Richard's hands grew cold despite his expensive leather gloves. She was describing 2 members of his own security team, men who had been with him for 3 years, men who had access to everything. Chapter 2. The Suspicion. Richard's mind worked rapidly, connecting dots he had previously dismissed as paranoia. The last-minute changes to his security rotation, the insistence that his briefcase be stored in the car early, The way Marcus had been unusually persistent about maintaining their exact departure schedule tonight. "Mr. Sterling, we really should go," Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge of anxiety poorly disguised as concern. "Traffic will be terrible if we wait any longer." "In a moment," Richard replied, pulling out his phone. He dialed Thomas, his executive assistant, a man whose loyalty had been proven through 2 decades of corporate wars. "Thomas, I need you to come down to the lobby entrance now. Don't tell anyone, just come." Emma stood quietly, her small frame tense as she watched the security guards exchange glances. Richard noticed the youngest guard, David, shift his weight nervously. The man's hand moved to his earpiece, whispering something too low to hear. "Sir, if there's a problem, we can handle it internally," Marcus suggested, taking a step closer. "No need to involve others." "That's exactly why I'm involving others," Richard said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The businessman in him recognized a negotiation gone wrong, and right now, every instinct screamed danger. Thomas emerged from the building within 3 minutes, his silver hair slightly disheveled, concern etched across his weathered face. At 55, Thomas had been with Richard since the company's early days, when they operated out of a cramped office in Queens. If anyone could be trusted, it was him. "Richard, what's wrong?" Thomas asked, immediately sensing the tension. "This young lady overheard something disturbing," Richard explained, gesturing to Emma, who was now partially hidden behind his legs. "She says members of my security team discussed tampering with the merger documents in my briefcase." Thomas's expression hardened. "The Blackwood merger papers?" "The very same." A subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere. Marcus and David exchanged a look that lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Thomas, trained by years of reading boardroom politics, caught it too. "Where's Harrison?" Thomas asked suddenly, referring to the one security team member Richard had personally vetted and hired against the recommendation of the security firm. "Called in sick today," Marcus replied quickly. "Food poisoning. Convenient," Thomas muttered. He turned to Richard. "Sir, I suggest we verify the contents of that briefcase before you go anywhere." "That's highly irregular," Marcus protested. "The briefcase is secured, sir. Protocol states it remains sealed until you reach your destination." "Whose protocol?" Richard demanded. "Mine or someone else's?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Emma tugged on Richard's sleeve. "The tall one is texting someone," she whispered. "He did the same thing when I heard him earlier." Richard looked down and saw Marcus's hand moving subtly at his side, thumb working his phone screen from inside his pocket. The businessman made a decision. "Thomas, call building security. Tell them we have a potential breach situation and need the head of facilities immediately. Also call Harrison, sick or not, I want him here. Can someone bring my briefcase out here in the open, where everyone can see it opened?" "Sir, I must protest," Marcus said, his composure finally cracking. "This is embarrassing and unnecessary. You're making a scene based on the words of a child who probably misunderstood what she heard. Then you'll be vindicated when we open the case and everything is in order," Richard said calmly, though his heart pounded. "Won't you, Marcus?" The guard's jaw tightened, and in that micro-expression, Richard saw confirmation of his worst fears. Chapter 3. The Revelation. The next 15 minutes unfolded like a tense chess match. Building security arrived, led by Janet Cooper, a no-nonsense former police officer who ran the tower's security operations. Harrison, the trusted guard, appeared shortly after, still looking pale but alert, his eyes immediately assessing the situation with professional precision. "You called me sick," Harrison said to Marcus, his voice low and dangerous. "I've been at my daughter's school play all evening. I told you that this morning." Marcus said nothing, his face an impassive mask, but Richard saw the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. David, the younger guard, looked increasingly uncomfortable, sweat beading on his forehead despite the October chill. The briefcase was retrieved from the sedan's trunk and placed on a concrete planter in front of the building's entrance. Under the bright security lights, with multiple witnesses present, Richard entered his combination and opened it. For a moment, everything looked normal. The leather folder containing the merger documents sat exactly where he had placed it that afternoon. But Thomas, ever meticulous, pulled out the folder and began examining the papers with the careful attention of someone who had reviewed these documents a dozen times. His face went pale. "Richard," Thomas said quietly, holding up several pages to the light. "These aren't your documents." "What do you mean?" Richard stepped closer. "The watermark is wrong." "Look here," Thomas pointed to the header. "Your legal team uses a specific security watermark on all merger papers. This one is close, but it's a digital copy. A very good forgery, but a copy nonetheless." He flipped through more pages. "And these signature pages, they're different stock. The real ones are bonded paper from Frankfurt. These are just high-quality laser prints." Janet Cooper moved forward, her hand instinctively moving to the radio on her belt. "Gentlemen, I think we need to have a conversation downtown." "Wait," Emma's small voice interrupted. "They said something else. About an account. About how after the papers were signed, money would move to Cayman accounts by morning, and no one would notice until it was too late." Richard felt as if he had been struck. The Blackwood merger involved the transfer of $70 million in assets. If someone had manipulated the documents to redirect those funds, by the time anyone discovered the fraud, the money would be untraceable, scattered across dozens of offshore accounts. "This goes deeper than just switching papers," Thomas said, his voice grim. He looked at Richard. "Someone would need access to your legal team's templates, your signature patterns, the transfer protocols. This isn't just your security team. This is internal." David suddenly broke. "I didn't know it would go this far," he blurted out, his young face crumbling. "Marcus said it was just about delaying some paperwork, that nobody would get hurt, that it was just business. He said powerful people needed this to happen, that fighting it would be pointless." "Shut up." "You fool," Marcus hissed, but Harrison moved with surprising speed, positioning himself between Marcus and David. "Keep talking." "Son," Janet said to David, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Who are these powerful people?" David looked at Marcus, then at Richard, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know names." Marcus handled everything, but he kept talking about the board, about how some members of your own board wanted this merger to fail, Mr. Sterling. They couldn't stop it legally, so they decided to make it collapse by redirecting the funds. They'd blame you for the missing money, force you out, and then restructure the company under new leadership. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Richard thought of the board meeting, of the faces around that table, of who had pushed hardest for his retirement, who stood to gain most from his removal. The merger wasn't just about business expansion. It was about control, about power, about removing the one person who stood in the way of a complete corporate takeover. Chapter 4. The Counterattack. Richard stood motionless, absorbing the magnitude of what had almost happened. Years of building his company, of fighting through recessions and hostile takeovers, nearly undone by false documents and corrupted trust. If Emma hadn't spoken up, by tomorrow morning he would have unknowingly signed papers that would have ruined him. The board would have had their perfect excuse to remove him, claiming incompetence or even complicity in the fraud. "Janet, I need those men detained and questioned," Richard said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Thomas, call our legal team. All of them. I want everyone in the conference room within the hour. And get me the real merger documents from the vault at headquarters." "Already on it," Thomas replied, phone to his ear. Marcus remained silent, his face carved from stone, but his eyes betrayed him. They flickered toward the street, as if calculating escape routes. Harrison, reading the same signals, positioned himself more firmly in the way. "You won't win this, Sterling," Marcus finally spoke, his voice cold. "You think stopping us tonight changes anything? The people behind this have resources you can't imagine. This was just one move in a much longer game." "Then I guess I'll have to learn the rules of this game," Richard replied. He turned to Emma, who had been standing quietly throughout the entire exchange, her small hand holding the edge of his coat. "Emma, you just saved my company. You saved everything I've worked for. How did you know to tell me?" The little girl looked up at him with those impossibly mature eyes. "My grandma always says that staying silent when you know something wrong is happening makes you part of the wrong. She says truth is like a seed. If you plant it, even if it's scary, something good will grow. If you hide it, it just rots." Richard felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he had built over decades of corporate warfare. When was the last time anyone had spoken to him about truth rather than strategy, about courage rather than profit margins? This child, with nothing to gain and potentially everything to lose, had risked approaching a stranger because it was the right thing to do. "Your grandmother sounds like a very wise woman," Richard said softly. "She's cleaning the 42nd floor right now," Emma said. "She doesn't know I'm down here." I snuck out because I was worried. I kept thinking about what would happen if I didn't say anything, and I couldn't sit still anymore. Thomas approached, ending his phone call. "Richard, we have a situation. I just spoke with Martin Blackwood himself. Someone from your board contacted him an hour ago, claiming you were backing out of the merger due to cold feet. They tried to paint you as unstable, suggested he should negotiate directly with the board instead." Richard's hands clenched. "Who?" "He wouldn't say over the phone, but he's agreed to come to the office now. He wants to understand what's really happening." Good. Richard's mind shifted into the mode that had made him successful, the ability to transform crisis into opportunity. "Here's what we're going to do. Janet, I want those fake documents examined by forensic experts tonight. I want to know who created them, where they came from, and any digital fingerprints we can find. Thomas, pull all security footage from the past week, especially around my office and the legal department. Someone physically accessed those templates." He looked at Emma again. "And I want to meet your grandmother. Right now." 20 minutes later, Richard sat in the sterile brightness of a 42nd floor conference room across from Maria Rodriguez, a woman in her late 60s, with the same intense eyes as her granddaughter. Her cleaning cart stood abandoned in the hallway, and her hands trembled slightly as she held Emma close. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling," Maria said in accented English. "Emma shouldn't have bothered you. She's a good girl, but sometimes too brave for her own good." "Mrs. Rodriguez," Richard interrupted gently, "your granddaughter didn't bother me. She saved me, and I want to make sure that kind of courage is rewarded, not punished." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Thomas, add Emma Rodriguez to the company's scholarship program, full ride kindergarten through college. And Mrs. Rodriguez, I'd like to offer you a position in our corporate ethics training program. We clearly need someone who understands what integrity actually means." Chapter 5. The Truth Unveiled. The conference room on the 60th floor filled rapidly with tension and expensive suits. Martin Blackwood arrived first, his silver beard and commanding presence filling the doorway. Behind him came the legal teams, forensic accountants, and eventually the board members Richard had summoned with a single, terse message that offered no explanation. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Richard began, standing at the head of the table. Emma sat in a chair near the window with her grandmother, quiet observers to corporate theatre. "Tonight we avoided a catastrophe, thanks to the courage of a 7-year-old girl." He proceeded to explain everything: the overheard conversation, the fake documents, the attempted fraud. As he spoke, he watched faces around the table carefully, looking for tells, for the flicker of recognition or fear that would identify the conspirators. Most looked genuinely shocked. But two faces, Patricia Chen and Robert Hammond, two board members who had pushed hardest for his retirement, remained carefully neutral. "Too neutral. The forensic team has been working quickly," Thomas announced, entering with a tablet. "The fake documents were created using a printer registered to our legal department, but accessed after hours using credentials that belonged to James Mitchell." James Mitchell, their senior legal counsel, who had unexpectedly resigned 2 weeks ago, citing family reasons. Another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "James didn't resign voluntarily, did he?" Richard said, looking directly at Patricia. "He was threatened or paid off. And you knew about it." Patricia's composure finally cracked. "You have no proof of anything, Richard. You're grasping at straws because you can't handle the fact that this board has legitimate concerns about your leadership." Actually, Janet Cooper entered the room holding a file. "We have quite a bit of proof. Mr. Mitchell's credentials were used, but the security footage shows he wasn't in the building those nights. However, you were, Ms. Chen. You and Mr. Hammond working late, repeatedly accessing floors you had no business being on." Robert Hammond stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We're board members. We have access to all floors. But not to the secure legal archives, Martin Blackwood interjected, his voice carrying the weight of his own decades in business. I've been watching this situation very carefully, Richard. When I received that call earlier tonight, attempting to undermine you, I recognized the voice. It was your voice, Robert, poorly disguised. You thought I wouldn't notice. The room erupted in murmurs. Robert's face flushed crimson. You can't prove any of this, so what if we had concerns about the merger? That's our job as board members. Your job is to act in the company's best interest, Richard said quietly, dangerously, not to orchestrate fraud to seize control. The Cayman accounts David mentioned, we found them. They're in shell corporations, but the trail leads back to consulting fees paid to companies you both own. You weren't just trying to remove me. You were trying to steal $70 million and frame me for it. Patricia's shoulders sagged. You don't understand the pressure we were under. Other companies, competitors, they approached us months ago. They said Sterling Industries was too traditional, too slow. They offered us positions guarantees if we could facilitate a hostile restructuring. So you sold out, Thomas said flatly. You sold out decades of loyalty for what? A better title? More money? We thought you'd never find out, Patricia whispered. Marcus assured us the switch would be seamless. By the time anyone noticed, you'd be gone, discredited, and we'd already have control. We could have made this company great again, modern, profitable. At the cost of integrity, Richard said. At the cost of everything that actually makes a company worth running. He looked at Emma, still sitting quietly with her grandmother. A child understood what you couldn't. That stealing is stealing no matter how you justify it. That truth matters more than profit. That courage means speaking up even when it's scary. He turned back to the board. Patricia, Robert, you're done. Resign tonight or face prosecution. The choice is yours, but you're leaving either way. Chapter 6. The Lesson. 3 weeks later, Richard Sterling stood in the renovated community center in Queens, the same neighborhood where he had started his business 30 years ago. Today was the opening ceremony for the Sterling Foundation Youth Initiative, a program dedicated to supporting children like Emma who showed exceptional character and courage. Emma stood beside him on the small stage, her grandmother beaming with pride in the front row. The merger with Blackwood had gone through successfully, properly this time, with genuine documents and transparent processes. Patricia Chen and Robert Hammond had resigned quietly, avoiding prosecution in exchange for full cooperation with the investigation. The board had been restructured with people Richard actually trusted, people who understood that a company's worth was measured by more than quarterly profits. I've been thinking a lot about what happened that night, Richard said to the gathered crowd of community members, press and business associates. For 30 years, I believed success was about strategy, about being smarter and tougher than everyone else. I surrounded myself with security and systems, thinking that would keep me safe. But it took a 7-year-old girl to show me what real protection looks like. It looks like integrity. It looks like having the courage to speak truth even when you're scared, even when powerful people might not want to hear it. He looked down at Emma, who smiled shyly. Emma, your grandmother taught you that silence in the face of wrong makes you part of the wrong. That lesson saved my company. But more importantly, it saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't have recognized in the mirror, someone who valued power over principle. Maria Rodriguez dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Richard had promoted her to Director of Corporate Ethics, a newly created position. She now trained every employee in the company, from executives to entry-level staff, about the importance of speaking up, of maintaining integrity even when it was difficult. Martin Blackwood stood and approached the microphone. Richard asked me to say a few words today. In my 40 years of business, I've seen a lot of deals, a lot of mergers, a lot of corporate maneuvering, but I've rarely seen someone willing to completely restructure their company's culture based on a lesson learned from a child. That takes a special kind of humility and a special kind of strength. Sterling Industries isn't just a better company now because they avoided fraud. It's better because they remembered what companies should actually stand for. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, as people mingled and children explored the new facility with its library, computer lab, and art spaces, Emma tugged on Richard's sleeve. Mr. Sterling, can I ask you something? Of course, Emma, anything. That night, when I warned you, I was really scared. I almost didn't say anything. What if I had just stayed quiet? Richard knelt down to her level, just as he had that cold October evening. But you didn't stay quiet. That's what matters. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. You taught me that. Grandma says every story needs to be told so other people can learn from it too, Emma said thoughtfully. Do you think our story could help other people? I think it already is, Richard replied, gesturing to the room full of children and families. Every person here tonight heard about what happened, about how one voice made a difference. Maybe next time they face a choice between silence and truth, they'll remember you and choose truth. As the evening wound down and Richard finally headed home, much later than planned, he found himself thinking about legacy differently than he ever had before. The company would continue. The buildings would stand. The profits would flow. But none of that would matter as much as this moment. This shift, this reminder that business, like life, is ultimately about people and principles. His phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. The message was simple but profound. The board meeting agenda for next month includes a proposal for quarterly community impact reports alongside financial reports. Times are changing, boss. For the better. Richard smiled and typed back, "About time."